A pregnant black woman with twins was evicted from her home in the middle of a storm. A stranger appeared to help her, but when she arrives at the hospital, she discovers something surprising about him. The smell of ozone filled the air, heralding the coming storm. Kiara Mason looked out of the foggy window of her small apartment in Millbrook, a suburban town in the heart of Alabama. The dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, as if they were conspiring against her. Ironically, the storm brewing in the sky was nothing compared to the storm raging in her heart. Kiara stroked her prominent belly, feeling the twins move restlessly inside her. At 28, she had never imagined she would be in this situation, pregnant, alone, and about to lose the only place she could call home. The apartment was modest, but it was her refuge, the place where she dreamed of raising her children. Now that dream was about to be swept away by the storm of reality. The shrill ring of the phone snapped her out of her thoughts. With trembling hands, Kiara answered, recognizing the number of her lawyer, Marcus Holloway. "Ms. Mason," Marcus' deep voice sounded on the other end of the line. "I have some bad news. The bank has rejected our latest offer. The auction is scheduled for 3 p.m. today." Kiara felt as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. But Marcus, you said we'd have more time. I've got 2 babies coming. For God's sake. "I'm sorry, Kiara. We've done everything we can. The debts have piled up too much." Marcus's voice was filled with genuine regret. "Do you have somewhere to go?" The question hung in the air like a sentence. Kiara looked around the small apartment, at the peeling walls that had witnessed so many nights of crying and hope. Her eyes landed on the only family photo she owned, her at 16 holding a baby in her arms, looking frightened and lost. The image was a painful reminder of another life, another difficult choice. I'll manage," Kiara finally replied, more to herself than to Marcus. After hanging up, Kiara allowed herself a moment of despair. The tears she had been holding back for weeks finally overflowed. She cried for herself, for the babies in her womb, and for the daughter she had given up for adoption so many years ago. Life seemed like a cruel cycle of loss and abandonment. A loud flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed by the deafening crash of thunder. Kiara startled, instinctively protecting her belly. It was as if the universe was shouting at her, reminding her that time was running out. With a determination born of desperation, Kiara began to gather her things. Clothes, documents, and the few items she had bought for the babies were stuffed into a battered suitcase. Each object held a story, a hope. The little teddy bear she bought the day she found out they were going to be twins, the pair of little knitted shoes her elderly neighbor had made, the yellow blanket she had started knitting herself, still unfinished. As she packed, memories of her own turbulent childhood flooded her mind, growing up in foster homes, never really belonging anywhere, always being the problem girl. Kiara had sworn to herself that her children would have a different, stable life. Now, looking at her half-empty suitcase and listening to the rain start to fall outside, she wondered if she was doomed to repeat the cycle. A new twitch made her stop, leaning against the wall. "Not yet, little ones," she murmured, massaging her belly. "Mommy needs more time." The clock on the wall read 2:30, 30 minutes until the auction. 30 minutes, until she officially no longer had a home. Kiara took a deep breath, trying to contain the panic that threatened to consume her. She had to be strong, for her and for the babies. With her suitcase in one hand and her maternity bag in the other, Kiara took one last look around the apartment. Every corner held a memory: the sofa where she slept in the first weeks of her pregnancy, when the nausea was unbearable; the small kitchen where she tried to learn how to cook healthy dishes for the babies; the room she dreamed of turning into a nursery. Now all that would be behind her. As she opened the door, Kiara was greeted by a gust of wind and rain. The storm had arrived in full force, as if to prevent her from leaving. For a moment she hesitated. Perhaps she could stay, beg for more time, pray for a miracle. But the distant sound of an approaching car reminded her of the harsh reality. The new owners would be there soon. With one last shaky breath, Kiara closed the door behind her and stepped out into the storm. The freezing rain hit her like 1,000 needles, soaking her clothes in seconds. The wind howled, threatening to knock her down with every step. Fighting against the elements, Chiara made her way down the street. Her feet splashed in the puddles that were already forming, soaking her shoes. With every step, the reality of her situation weighed more heavily on her shoulders. Where would she go? Who would help her? The streets of Millbrook, normally quiet and welcoming, now seemed hostile and alien under the dark sky and the pouring rain. Chiara passed hastily closed stores, parked cars with windshield wipers working furiously, and people running for cover. A new contraction, stronger than the previous ones, brought her to an abrupt halt. Chiara leaned on a lamppost, letting her suitcase fall to the soggy ground. "Please," she begged, not knowing exactly to whom or what. "Please, I need help." It was at that moment, when Chiara was at her lowest, that she saw him. A man was running down the street, helping people take shelter from the storm. He seemed to be everywhere at once, offering umbrellas, helping elderly people cross flooded streets, guiding people to makeshift shelters. Their gazes met for a moment. The man seemed to assess Chiara's situation in seconds, noticing her protruding belly, the fallen suitcase, and the look of sheer desperation on her face. Without hesitation, he ran towards her. "Are you all right?" he shouted over the noise of the storm, arriving at Chiara's side. His blue eyes conveyed genuine concern. Chiara opened her mouth to reply, but all that came out was a sob. Years of pride and forced independence dissolved in that moment. She shook her head, unable to articulate the maelstrom of emotions and fears that consumed her. The stranger, realizing the gravity of the situation, acted quickly. He took Chiara's suitcase in one hand and gently held her by the arm with the other. "Let's get out of this rain," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "There's a makeshift shelter in the church nearby. We can go there and see how we can help you, okay?" Chiara nodded, grateful for any direction in that moment of chaos. As they walked together through the storm, she couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Who was this man? Why was he helping so many people? And most importantly, could he really help her? The church came into view, its doors open like a beacon in a storm. People crowded inside, seeking refuge. Chiara hesitated for a moment at the entrance, looking at the stranger who had helped her. "By the way," he said with a reassuring smile, "my name is Jordan Reeves, and you are—" "Chiara," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "Chiara Mason." As they walked into the church, Chiara couldn't have imagined that this chance meeting, born out of storm and despair, was about to change the course of her life forever. The storm outside continued to roar, but inside, a small flame of hope was beginning to ignite. The interior of the Church of San Francisco was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The air was charged with the aroma of hot coffee and the low murmur of worried voices. Dozens of people huddled in the wooden pews, some wrapped in blankets, others exchanging wet clothes for donated dry ones. The storm continued to roar outside, occasionally illuminating the colorful stained glass windows with flashes of lightning. Jordan guided Chiara gently through the crowd, his firm hand on her elbow offering a support she didn't even know she needed so much. They approached a quieter area near the altar, where a few folding chairs had been arranged to form a sort of makeshift waiting room. "Sit here," Jordan said, pulling out a chair for Chiara. "I'll get you something dry to wear and some hot water. Are you having contractions?" Chiara nodded, unable to contain a grimace as another wave of pain hit her. "They started a few hours ago, but they're getting stronger now." Jordan frowned, clearly worried. "Okay, don't move. I'll be back in a minute." As Jordan walked away, Chiara finally had a moment to observe him. He was tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world. His dark brown hair was tousled by the rain and wind, but his blue eyes shone with an almost feverish determination as he moved among the people, offering help here and there. Chiara wondered who he really was. A volunteer, a church official, or just a good Samaritan caught in the storm like everyone else. Whatever the answer, she felt grateful for his presence. Minutes later, Jordan returned with a pile of dry clothes, a bottle of water, and a steaming glass of tea. "Here," he said, handing the items to Kiara. "The bathroom is just over there if you want to change. The tea should help calm you down a bit." Kiara accepted the offerings with a grateful smile. "Thanks, Jordan. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up." Jordan shrugged, a shy smile playing on his lips. "Just doing my bit. No one should face a storm like this alone, especially not someone in your condition." Kiara felt her cheeks heat up, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance and the precarious situation she found herself in. She opened her mouth to say something, but was interrupted by another contraction, this one stronger than the previous ones. Jordan immediately knelt down beside her, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Kiara, we need to talk about your situation. These contractions are getting more frequent and intense. Do you have a plan? Somewhere to go after this?" The question hit Kiara like a punch in the gut. The full reality of her situation returned with full force. She shook her head, tears threatening to fall again. I've just been evicted. I have nowhere to go." Jordan nodded, as if he had expected this answer. "Okay, let's take this one step at a time. First, we need to make sure you and the babies are safe and healthy. There's a hospital a few blocks away. As soon as the rain lets up, we can take you there." Kiara felt a wave of panic. "But I don't have insurance or the money to pay for a hospital." "Don't worry about that now," Jordan said firmly. "I know some people at St. Mary's Hospital. They have programs for cases like yours. We'll take care of it, okay?" Something in the way Jordan spoke, the confidence in his voice, made Kiara feel a little calmer. She nodded slowly, allowing herself to believe, at least for a moment, that maybe things could work out. "Good," Jordan smiled. "Now, while we wait for the rain to subside, how about you tell me a bit more about yourself? How you ended up in this situation?" Kiara hesitated. She wasn't used to opening up to strangers, but something about Jordan made her feel safe. Perhaps it was tiredness, or fear, or simply a desperate need for human connection, but she found herself starting to speak. I grew up in the foster system," she began, her voice low. "I never knew my birth parents. I went from foster home to foster home until I turned 18. After that, I tried to make it on my own, but, well, it wasn't always easy." Jordan listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding and something else, a sadness that Kiara couldn't fully understand. "When I found out I was pregnant," Kiara continued, "I swore I would do everything differently, that I would give these babies the home and family I never had. But then I lost my job. The bills started piling up and—" She made a vague gesture with her hand, indicating the situation she was in. Jordan nodded thoughtfully. "You're stronger than you think, Kiara. Many people would have given up long before now. The fact that you're here, still fighting, says a lot about you." Jordan's words touched Kiara in a way she hadn't expected. For so long, she had felt like a failure, a disappointment. Hearing someone, even a stranger, see strength in her was comforting. "Thank you," she murmured, feeling the tears return. "It's just, sometimes it seems that no matter how hard I try, things always go wrong, like I'm destined to fail." Jordan leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Kiara, look at me. You're not destined to fail. You're destined to be a mother to these babies, to give them the love and care that you yourself didn't have. And you're not alone in that." At that moment, something shifted in the air between them. It was as if an invisible connection had formed, born of mutual understanding and compassion. Kiara felt as if, for the first time in a long time, someone really saw her. The moment was interrupted by a particularly loud clap of thunder, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Jordan stood up quickly, his protective instincts kicking in. "Stay here," he said to Kiara. "I'm going to see what happened." As Jordan moved away to check on the situation, Kiara found herself reflecting on everything that had happened in the last few hours. Suddenly, she remembered something Jordan had said earlier. "Jordan," she called out, making him stop and turn around. "You mentioned that you know people at St. Mary's Hospital. Do you work there?" For a moment, a shadow seemed to pass across Jordan's face. "Not exactly," he replied after a pause. I'm a social worker. I work with families in situations like yours. The revelation struck Kiara like a thunderbolt. Social worker. The words evoked memories of her own childhood, of nameless faces coming in and out of her life, always promising help, rarely delivering. She felt a twinge of distrust, an instinctive reaction built up over years of disappointment. But then she looked at Jordan, at the genuine concern in his eyes, at the way he had thrown himself into the storm to help strangers, and she realized that maybe, just maybe, not all social workers were the same. I understand, Kiara finally said. Thank you for being honest with me. Jordan gave a small smile, as if he understood exactly what was going through Kiara's mind. Always, he replied simply, before turning to deal with the emergency. As she watched him walk away, Kiara felt a strange mixture of emotions. Gratitude, for sure. A little fear still, but also, surprisingly, a twinge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this storm could be the start of something new, something better. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the church, in Kiara's heart, something was beginning to change. The storm that had brought so much destruction had also brought Jordan into her life, and with him, the possibility of a new beginning. Kiara stroked her belly, feeling the babies move inside her. "It's okay, little ones," she murmured. "Mommy's here, and maybe we're not alone anymore." The storm continued outside, but inside the church, a ray of hope began to shine. The storm outside seemed to mirror the whirlwind of emotions inside Kiara. The raindrops lashed the church windows with a relentless fury, as if they wanted to come in and drag her back to the chaos from which she had just escaped. But here, in this makeshift sanctuary, Kiara found herself in a strange limbo between fear and hope. Jordan returned a few minutes later, his clothes even wetter than before. He had helped repair a broken window on the west side of the church, preventing any more water from getting in. His eyes immediately sought out Kiara, and she felt a wave of warmth as she saw the genuine concern in his gaze. "How are you feeling?" he asked, taking a seat next to her. Kiara shrugged, trying to ignore the contraction that was forming. "I've been better," she replied with a weak smile, "but I've also been worse." Jordan nodded, understanding. "Kiara, I know you have no reason to trust me. I know that life hasn't been easy for you, and that people in my position have probably let you down in the past." Kiara felt her throat tighten. How could he read her thoughts so easily? "But I want you to know," Jordan continued, his voice soft but firm, "that I'm here to help. For real. No ulterior motives, no judgments. Just to help." Something in the way he spoke, the raw sincerity in his voice, made Kiara's defenses begin to crumble. She felt tears forming in her eyes, but quickly brushed them away. "Why?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Why do you care so much?" Jordan was silent for a moment, as if carefully considering his answer. "Because everyone deserves a chance," he finally said. "Because I've seen a lot of people like you, Kiara. Good people, strong people, who just needed someone to believe in them." He paused, and Kiara could see a shadow pass across his eyes. "And because I know what it's like to feel like the whole world is against you. I know what it's like to fight alone." At that moment, Kiara saw beyond the confident social worker. She saw a man who carried his own scars, his own battles, and somehow that made her trust him even more. Before she could respond, another contraction hit her, stronger than the previous ones. Kiara gasped, grabbing Jordan's arm instinctively. "Okay, I think it's time we went to the hospital," Jordan said, his voice calm but urgent. "Do you think you can walk?" Kiara nodded, biting her lip to hold back a groan. Jordan helped her up, supporting most of her weight. Together, they headed for the church exit. Outside, the storm had abated somewhat, but the rain was still falling steadily. The streets were flooded, small rivers flowing where there had once been sidewalks. "My car is a few blocks away," Jordan said, guiding Kiara carefully through the soaked streets. "Let's go slowly, okay? One step at a time." They moved forward slowly, Jordan shielding Kiara as much as possible from the rain with his own body. Every few steps, Kiara had to stop to breathe through another contraction. "You're doing great," Jordan encouraged her constantly. "We're almost there." As they walked, Kiara couldn't help noticing how different Millbrook looked in the rain. The familiar streets had turned into a watery maze, the buildings and houses rising up like islands in a grey sea. It was as if the storm had washed away the city, revealing a more raw and honest version of it. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached Jordan's car. It was a modest but well-kept sedan. Jordan opened the passenger door for Kiara, helping her in before running around to the driver's side. As soon as they got into the car, Jordan's cell phone rang. He looked at the screen, frowning. "It's the hospital," he said to Kiara. "Just a second." Jordan answered the call, his voice becoming professional and focused. Kiara tried not to listen, concentrating on her breathing, but she couldn't help picking up fragments of the conversation. "Yes, I'm taking her now. No, not yet. I understand, but... Look, I know it's not ideal, but... Okay, I'll do my best." He hung up the phone with a frustrated sigh. "Is everything all right?" Kiara asked, concern evident in her voice. Jordan hesitated for a moment before answering. "The storm caused some problems at the hospital. They're overloaded, operating with reduced staff. But don't worry," he added quickly, seeing the panicked expression on Kiara's face. "We'll be able to take care of you and the babies. I promise." Kiara nodded, trying to believe Jordan's words, as he started the car and began to navigate the flooded streets. She couldn't help feeling that they were entering uncharted waters, both literally and figuratively. The journey to the hospital was tense. The streets were almost deserted, except for a few abandoned cars and debris washed up by the storm. Jordan drove carefully, his eyes constantly switching between the road ahead and Kiara beside him. "So," Kiara said, trying to distract herself from the pain, "how did you become a social worker?" Jordan smiled slightly, as if the question brought back bittersweet memories. "It's a long story," he replied, "but the short version is, I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be the person I needed when I was younger." Kiara looked at him curiously. "Did you also go through difficult times?" Jordan nodded slowly. "Let's just say that I understand more than you think about fighting against the odds." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that Kiara hadn't noticed before, that made her want to know more, but before she could ask, another contraction hit her, stronger than all the previous ones. "Jordan," she gasped, grabbing his arm, "I think the babies are coming. Now." Jordan's eyes widened, but his voice remained calm. "Okay, Kiara, breathe with me. We're almost there. Can you hold on for a few more minutes?" Kiara nodded, although she wasn't sure if she was convincing herself or Jordan. She closed her eyes, concentrating on her breathing and Jordan's words of encouragement. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at St. Mary's Hospital. Jordan parked in the emergency room and ran to Kiara's side, helping her out of the car. The moment they entered the emergency room, it was as if they had been engulfed by a new kind of storm. Nurses and doctors were running around, patients were moaning on stretchers in the corridors, and the air was charged with a mixture of antiseptic and anxiety. "I need help here," Jordan shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Woman in labor, twins." A nurse quickly approached, assessing the situation with experienced eyes. "Take her to room 3, she ordered, signaling for an assistant to bring in a wheelchair. As Kiara was wheeled into the examination room, Jordan stayed behind, filling in forms and providing what information he could. Kiara felt a pang of panic as she watched him disappear from sight. "Jordan," she called out, her voice shaking. "I'm here, Kiara," he replied, appearing beside her as if summoned by magic. "I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'm right here with you." The next few hours passed in a blur of pain, fear, and determination. Kiara fought through every contraction, every push, with Jordan by her side, offering words of encouragement and his hand to squeeze. And then, suddenly, the sound of crying filled the room, quickly followed by another. "Congratulations, Kiara," the doctor said with a tired smile. You have a boy and a girl, both healthy and strong?" Kiara looked at the two little bundles that had been placed in her arms, hardly believing that they were real. Her children, her miracles. She looked at Jordan, tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered. Jordan smiled, his own eyes shining with emotion. "You did it, Kiara. You're incredible." In that moment, with her babies in her arms and Jordan by her side, Kiara felt something she hadn't felt for a long time. Hope. The storm outside might continue to roar. But here, in this small hospital room, a new day had dawned. But while Kiara was lost in the joy of the moment, she didn't notice the conflicted expression that crossed Jordan's face. Nor did she hear the heavy sigh he gave as he quietly left the room, his cell phone already in his hand, ready to make a call that would change everything. The storm may have passed, but the waters it left behind were still far from calm. The soft sound of heart monitors and the sterile smell of disinfectant filled the air of the hospital room. Kiara, exhausted but radiant, held her newborn twins in her arms. Her eyes couldn't leave the little faces, marveling at every movement, every sound they made. "Hello, my loves," she whispered, her voice tinged with emotion. "Welcome to the world." The boy, with a fluff of dark hair, stirred slightly in his sleep. The girl, on the other hand, was wide awake, her deep blue eyes fixed on her mother's face with a surprising intensity for a newborn. Kiara could hardly believe that they were real, that she had really made it. After everything she had been through, all the doubts and fears, here they were, perfect, healthy, and completely hers. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. Jordan entered quietly, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "How are the three musketeers?" he asked softly, approaching the bed. Kiara smiled back, a wave of gratitude flooding her at the sight of the man who had helped her so much. "We're fine. Tired, but fine." Jordan leaned over to take a closer look at the babies, his face softening with admiration. "They're beautiful, Kiara. You've done an incredible job." For a moment, they were silent, soaking up the peace of the moment. But Kiara couldn't help noticing a subtle tension in Jordan's shoulders, a shadow in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Jordan," she began hesitantly, "is everything all right?" He seemed surprised by the question, as if he had been caught off guard. "Of course," he answered quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Why wouldn't I be?" Kiara frowned, not entirely convinced. "I don't know, you seem worried about something." Jordan sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that Kiara had already learned to associate with nervousness. I need to talk to you about something, Kiara. Something important." Kiara's heart raced, an irrational fear settling in her chest. "What is it? Is something wrong with the babies?" No, Jordan hastened to reassure her. "The babies are perfectly fine. It's about your situation." Kiara felt her body stiffen. Of course it was. How could she forget, even for a moment, the reality of her situation? The bubble of happiness she was floating in burst abruptly, bringing her back to harsh reality. "What about my situation?" she asked, her voice now cautious. Jordan pulled a chair close to the bed, sitting down with a heavy sigh. "Kiara, you know that as a social worker, I have certain obligations, responsibilities that I can't ignore as much as I sometimes want to." A chill spread through Kiara's body, freezing her to the bone. "What do you mean?" "Your current situation," Jordan continued, choosing his words carefully, "raises some concerns from a child welfare point of view. You have no housing, no income, no support system." "No," Kiara interrupted, her voice shaking. "No, you can't be thinking—" "Kiara, please listen to me," Jordan pleaded, leaning forward. "I don't want to do this, believe me, but legally, I'm obliged to report cases like yours. And once the report is made, the Children's Services Department will have to investigate." Tears began to stream down Kiara's face. Instinctively, she clutched the babies tighter to her, as if she could protect them only with the strength of her embrace. "You're going to take my children away from me," she whispered, the pain in her voice palpable. Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, as if the words had physically wounded him. "That's not what I want, Kiara. That's not what I'm going to recommend. but I need to be honest with you about the process and the possibilities." Kiara shook her head, denial and fear fighting inside her. I thought you were here to help me." "And I am," Jordan insisted, his voice heavy with emotion. "Kiara, look at me. I promise you that I will do everything in my power to keep you and your children together. But to do that, we need to work together. We need to show the department that you have a plan, that you're willing to do whatever it takes to provide a stable environment for these children." Kiara looked down at the babies in her arms, her heart breaking at the thought of losing them. She had promised herself that she would be different, that she would give them what she never had, and now, here she was, facing the same system that had failed her so many times in the past. What do I need to do?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jordan seemed to relax a little, relieved that Kiara was willing to cooperate. "First, we need to find a place for you to stay. There are some shelters for single mothers in the city that could be a temporary option. We'll also need to create a plan for your financial independence, perhaps some vocational courses or training programs. And, of course, we'll need to make sure you have access to all the resources you need to look after the babies. Medical care, food, clothes." Kiara nodded slowly, trying to absorb all the information. It seemed like an impossible mountain to climb, especially considering how exhausted she already was. What if it's not enough?" she asked, giving voice to her greatest fear. Jordan hesitated for a moment before answering, "If it comes to that, there are other options. Temporary placement with a host family, for example, while you settle in. But Kiara, I promise you, we'll do everything we can to prevent that from happening." Kiara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. When she opened them again, there was a fierce determination in her gaze. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said firmly. "These babies are everything to me. I won't lose them." Jordan smiled, a genuine smile this time. "That's the Kiara I knew, strong, determined, and you're not alone in this, okay? I'll be with you every step of the way." At that moment, as if sensing the tension in the air, both babies began to cry. Kiara immediately sprang into action, soothing them with soft murmurs and gentle rocking. Jordan watched, amazed at how naturally Kiara took on her role as mother. "See?" he said softly. "Hey, you're already a great mom. Let's make this work, Kiara, together." Kiara nodded, a small smile forming on her lips despite the circumstances. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and challenges, but looking at her children's faces, she found a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Together," she repeated, sealing a silent promise not only with Jordan, but with her children and herself. As the storm outside finally began to dissipate, a new journey was just beginning for Kiara and her babies. A journey of struggle, growth, and, hopefully, redemption. Jordan stood up, preparing to leave and begin the necessary preparations. But before he went, he turned to Kiara one last time. "Oh, and Kiara? Do they have names?" Kiara looked at her children, a soft smile spreading across her face. "Yes," she replied. "The boy is Noah, because he survived the storm. And the girl—" she paused, her eyes meeting Jordan's. "The girl is Hope, because that's what she gave me." Jordan felt a lump form in his throat. "Noah and Hope," he repeated softly. "Perfect names." With a final wave, Jordan left the room, leaving Kiara with her thoughts and her babies. The waters of the storm may have been murky, but amidst the chaos, a glimmer of hope began to shine through. And for Kiara at that moment, that light was all she needed to keep fighting. The days following Noah and Hope's birth were a roller coaster of emotions for Kiara. The joy of being a mother was mixed with the constant fear of losing her children, creating an emotional whirlwind that left her exhausted and anxious. The hospital room, which had initially seemed like a safe haven, now felt more like a prison. Every time a nurse entered, every time a doctor made his rounds, Kiara felt her heart racing, fearing that it was someone from social services coming to take her babies away. Jordan showed up every day, always with an encouraging smile and news of the progress he was making on Kiara's behalf. He had secured a temporary place in a shelter for single mothers, was helping with the paperwork for government assistance, and had even contacted some local organizations that offered professional training for mothers in vulnerable situations. One particularly tense afternoon, while Kiara was breastfeeding Hope, Jordan entered the room with a serious expression. "Kiara, we need to talk," he said, sitting down in the chair next to the bed. Kiara felt her stomach sink. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Jordan sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that Kiara already recognized as a sign of nervousness. "The Social Services Department wants to make an initial assessment of your situation. They'll come tomorrow." The immediate panic Kiara felt must have been visible on her face, because Jordan quickly added, "Don't worry, I'll be here with you. It's just an initial conversation to better understand your situation and discuss the next steps." Kiara nodded slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. What should I tell them?" "The truth," Jordan replied simply. "Be honest about your situation, but also show them your determination to create a stable environment for Noah and Hope. Talk about your plans, about how you're willing to work hard to provide a better life for your children." Kiara looked at Hope, who had fallen asleep in her arms, and Noah, sleeping peacefully in the crib next to her. The idea that someone could take them away from her was unbearable. "What if it's not enough?" she whispered, giving voice to her greatest fear. Jordan leaned forward, his eyes meeting Kiara's. "It will be. It has to be. Kiara, I've seen what you're like with these babies. You're an incredible mother even though you've only just started. Let's show them, okay?" Kiara nodded, grateful for Jordan's trust, even if she couldn't fully share it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. Jordan stayed with Kiara, helping her organize her thoughts and prepare for the questions she was likely to be asked. The next morning, Kiara woke up before sunrise, her nerves on edge. She spent hours making sure everything was perfect, the babies clean and well-fed, the room tidy, herself as presentable as possible in the circumstances. At 10 o'clock sharp, there was a knock on the door. Jordan entered, accompanied by a middle-aged woman with a notepad and a neutral expression. "Kiara," Jordan said, her voice calm and professional, "this is Ms. Valerie Harding, from the Department of Social Services. She's here to do the initial assessment we discussed." Kiara straightened up in bed, trying to look confident despite the fear eating away at her stomach. "Hello, Mrs. Harding. Thank you for coming." Valerie nodded politely, her eyes quickly scanning the room and the babies before settling on Kiara. "Miss Mason, I'm here to discuss your current situation and your plans for the future. May we begin?" The next 2 hours were an emotional roller coaster for Kiara. Valerie asked questions about everything: her childhood in the foster care system, her current financial situation, her plans for housing and employment, her support network or lack thereof. Each question seemed to highlight all the ways in which Kiara was not prepared to be a mother. But at every moment when Kiara felt she was sinking, Jordan would subtly intervene, reminding Valerie of the progress already made and the plans underway. He was a constant and reassuring presence, a silent reminder to Kiara that she was not alone in this struggle. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Valerie closed her notebook. "Well, Miss Mason, I must say that your situation is challenging. There are many obstacles to overcome." Kiara felt her heart sink, but Valerie wasn't finished. "However," she continued, her tone softening slightly, "I also see a dedicated and determined mother. Mr. Reeves briefed me on the plans you've been developing, and I'm cautiously optimistic." Kiara let out a breath she didn't even know she was holding. "So, what happens now?" Valerie looked at Jordan before answering. "For the time being, I see no need to remove the children from your care. But," she added quickly, seeing the relief on Kiara's face, "this is conditional. You'll have to strictly follow the plan we've developed. Regular home visits will be carried out, and any sign of neglect or inability to properly care for the children will result in an immediate reassessment of the situation." Kiara nodded vigorously. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. Valerie stood up, preparing to leave. Mr. Reeves, I trust you will continue to monitor this situation closely. Jordan nodded, his face serious. Of course, Mrs. Harding. I'll be in constant contact with Kiara and will update the department regularly. After Valerie left, Kiara finally let out a sob she had been holding back. Oh my God, Jordan! For a moment I thought... I know, Jordan said softly, sitting down next to her on the bed. But you were incredible, Kiara. You showed her exactly what I knew I'd see. A strong, devoted mother. Kiara looked at Noah and Hope, who had miraculously slept through the entire interview. I can't lose them, Jordan. They're all I have. And you won't lose them, Jordan assured her. But Kiara, you have to understand, the road ahead won't be easy. There will be days when you want to give up, days when it seems impossible. But you're not alone, okay? I'll be here, every step of the way. Kiara looked at Jordan, really looked at him for the first time since she had met him. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the worry lines on his forehead. She realized that with a jolt, how much he was investing in her and their children. Why? She asked softly. Why do you care so much? Jordan was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant as if he were seeing something beyond the hospital room. When he finally spoke, his voice was charged with emotion. Because a long time ago, I was you, Kiara, young, scared, alone, and someone believed in me when no one else did. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. And I swore that if I was ever in a position to do the same for someone else, I would. Kiara felt tears forming in her eyes. She reached out, taking Jordan's hand. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Jordan squeezed her hand back, a soft smile on his lips. Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work ahead of us. But we'll manage, Kiara, one day at a time. At that moment, with the afternoon sun streaming in through the hospital window, illuminating the faces of her sleeping children, Kiara felt something she hadn't felt for a long time. Hope. The waters were still rough, the challenges were still many, but for the first time, she really believed she could navigate them. The road ahead would be difficult, the waters not always smooth, but with Noah and Hope as her anchor, and Jordan as her lighthouse, Kiara was ready to face the storm. The months following Kiara's release from hospital were a mixture of small victories and seemingly endless challenges. The shelter for single mothers, although far from ideal, offered a roof over their heads and the basics needed to look after Noah and Hope. The nights were long, filled with babies crying and doubts whispered in the darkness, but Kiara clung to the determination she had discovered in herself. Jordan was a constant presence, visiting regularly, helping with endless paperwork, and offering words of encouragement in the most difficult moments. His dedication went beyond what Kiara would expect from a social worker, and she often found herself wondering about the true motivations behind his unwavering commitment. One fall afternoon, as the golden leaves danced outside the window of the small room Kiara shared with the twins at the shelter, Jordan appeared with a wider smile than usual. "I've got good news," he announced, taking a seat on the only available chair in the cramped room. Kiara, who was changing Noah's diaper, looked at him with a mixture of hope and caution. She had learned not to get too excited by promises of good news. "What is it?" "Remember that job training program I mentioned? Well, I've got an opening for you. It's a 6-month administrative assistant course, and the best thing, they offer free childcare for participants." Kiara's heart leapt. A chance to learn a new skill, to build a future for herself and her children. It was more than she dared hope for. But then reality hit her. "But what about the shelter? What about the social service visits? I can't just..." Jordan held up a hand, gently interrupting her. "I've thought about all that. I've spoken to Mrs. Harding. She sees it as a positive step. As for the shelter, they've agreed to keep your place, as long as you keep following the rules and making progress." Kiara finished changing Noah, putting him back in the makeshift crib next to Hope. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything. "It sounds too good to be true," she muttered. Jordan leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. "Kiara, you deserve this. You've worked hard. You've proved your dedication as a mother. This is just the universe giving you back a little of what you deserve." Kiara felt tears forming in her eyes. "I can't thank you enough, Jordan, for everything." Jordan smiled, but there was something in his eyes, a shadow that Kiara couldn't quite decipher. "You don't have to thank me. Seeing you and the children thrive is thanks enough." In the weeks that followed, Kiara plunged headlong into the training program. It was exhausting, balancing her studies with the demands of being a mother of twins, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't for years. Every new skill she learned, every little compliment from her instructors, was a step towards the future she dreamed of for her family. The twins, now almost 6 months old, were growing rapidly. Noah was a quiet baby, always observing the world around him with curious eyes. Hope, on the other hand, was a ball of energy, always babbling and trying to reach everything within reach. Watching them develop, discovering their unique personalities, was Kiara's greatest joy. But as Kiara became more confident and independent, she began to notice subtle changes in Jordan. His visits, although still regular, seemed more tense. Sometimes she would catch him looking at the twins with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of sadness, guilt, and something else. One night, after putting the twins to bed, Kiara decided to confront Jordan. He was sitting at the small table in the bedroom, going through some papers. "Jordan," she began, sitting down facing him, "is there something you're not telling me?" He looked at her, surprised. "What are you talking about?" Kiara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "You've been different lately, distant. And sometimes, the way you look at Noah and Hope, it's like you're carrying some kind of weight." Jordan was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was charged with emotion. "Kiara, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Kiara's heart raced. "What is it?" Jordan looked up, and Kiara could see the conflict in his gaze. "Remember when we first met, during the storm? I told you I was a social worker, that I'd helped families in similar situations." Kiara nodded, not understanding what he was getting at. "Well, that's not the whole truth," Jordan continued, his voice almost a whisper. I was the social worker responsible for the adoption of your first daughter years ago." Kiara's world seemed to stop. Jordan's words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't fully grasp their meaning. "What?" she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. Jordan ran his hand over his face, seeming to age years in seconds. "I was at the beginning of my career. It was one of my first cases. A young mother, scared and alone, wanting to give her daughter the best possible chance." "You knew," Kiara interrupted, her voice rising. "You knew from the start who I was." Jordan nodded miserably. "Yes, when I saw you that night, pregnant and desperate, I recognized you immediately, and I saw a chance to put things right." "Fix things," Kiara almost screamed, remembering at the last second the sleeping babies. "What exactly were you trying to fix, Jordan?" "I made mistakes in that case, Kiara," Jordan admitted, his voice breaking. "I was young, inexperienced. I didn't do everything I could have done to keep you and your daughter together. When I saw you again, I thought I could do things right this time." Kiara stood up abruptly, unable to sit still. She paced the small room, trying to process everything she was hearing. Her whole relationship with Jordan, all the help he had offered, everything seemed different now, tinged by this new revelation. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she finally asked, turning to face him. Jordan lowered his eyes, unable to face her accusing gaze. "I wanted to so many times, but I was afraid that if you knew, you wouldn't accept my help. Afraid that you would hate me." Kiara felt a wave of contradictory emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, but also, surprisingly, a twinge of understanding. She remembered her own frightened young self, making the painful decision to give her daughter up for adoption. Could she blame Jordan for also making mistakes when she was young and inexperienced? "I don't hate you, Jordan," she finally said, her voice tired. "But I don't know if I can trust you now." Jordan nodded, accepting her words as if they were a sentence. "I understand, and I'll respect whatever decision you make. But Kiara, Please know that everything I've done, all the help I've offered, has been genuine. I really want the best for you and the twins." Kiara looked at the cribs where Noah and Hope were sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. She thought of everything Jordan had done for her, of how he had been her only real support over the last few months. "I need time," she finally said. "Time to think, to process all this." Jordan stood up, collecting his papers. "Of course. I completely understand. I'll give you the space you need." He walked to the door, but before he left, he turned one last time. "Kiara, whatever you decide, know that I'm proud of you, of the progress you've made, of the incredible mother you've become. And if you want to know more about your first daughter, about how she's doing, I can try to find out." With those words, he left, leaving Kiara alone with her swirling thoughts and 2 sleeping children. That night, as the moon cast shadows across the small room, Kiara lay awake, going over every interaction she had with Jordan, every word, every gesture. The hidden currents that had shaped their relationship were now exposed, and she found herself navigating uncharted waters once again. But as she looked at Noah and Hope, Kiara felt a resolution forming inside her. Regardless of the past, regardless of the secrets and half-truths, she had a future to build, a future for her children, and maybe, just maybe, that future would also include finding out what happened to the daughter she had given up for adoption so long ago. With that thought, Kiara finally fell asleep, the first lights of dawn beginning to seep through the window, promising a new day and, with it, new possibilities. The days following Jordan's revelation were a whirlwind for Kiara. Every moment of silence was filled with conflicting thoughts, painful memories, and unanswered questions. She found herself looking at Noah and Hope, marveling at how much she loved them, and then being hit by the stabbing pain of thinking about the daughter she had given up for adoption so many years ago. The training program became her refuge, a place where she could focus on something other than the emotional chaos that consumed her. Her instructors noticed her redoubled dedication, praising her progress, and even suggesting that she could be a candidate for a position in a local company after completing the course. It was 2 weeks of absolute silence from Jordan. Kiara oscillated between relief at having space to think and worry that she had lost the only real support she had. But then, one Friday afternoon, as she was packing up the twins after nursery, there was a hesitant knock on the door. Jordan was there, looking thinner and more tired than Kiara remembered. His eyes, always so confident, were now full of uncertainty. "Hi," he said softly. I hope you're not disturbing." Kiara hesitated for a moment before stepping aside, allowing him to enter. "The twins have just gone to sleep," she said, more to fill the silence than anything else. Jordan nodded, his eyes roaming the room, noticing the new drawings on the walls, the organized toys, the study books on the desk. "The place looks great," he commented. "You've done an amazing job, Kiara." There was a pause, heavy with all the unspoken things between them. Finally, Kiara broke the silence. "Why are you here, Jordan?" He took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for something. "I have information." "About your daughter." Kiara's heart stopped for a moment. Did you find her?" Jordan nodded slowly. "Her name is Lily. She's 12 now. She lives with a foster family in Asheville, about 2 hours from here." Kiara sat up abruptly in bed, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. Is she all right?" "From what I've been able to find out, yes," Jordan replied, sitting down cautiously in the chair. "She's at school, plays the violin, loves animals. Her adoptive parents seem to be good, loving people." Silent tears began to stream down Kiara's face. Lily, her daughter, had a name, a life, interests. She was more real than she had ever been, and yet so far away. "There's more," Jordan continued softly. "Lily knows she's adopted, and recently she expressed an interest in meeting her birth mother." Kiara looked at Jordan, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. "She wants to meet me." Jordan nodded. "Her adoptive parents are open to the idea, but Kiara, I need you to understand. This is a huge decision for everyone involved. It's not something to be taken lightly. Kiara stood up, walking over to the cribs where Noah and Hope were sleeping peacefully. She watched their serene little faces, so full of possibilities. "I always wondered," she said softly, "if I had done the right thing, if she was happy, if she hated me for abandoning her." "You didn't abandon her, Kiara," Jordan said firmly. "You did what you believed was best for her at the time, and as far as I can see, she's had a good life." Kiara turned to face Jordan, years of repressed emotions finally coming to the surface. "But what if I had fought harder? What if I had tried harder? What if you had helped me like you're helping me now?" Jordan lowered his head, guilt evident in every line of his body. "I've asked myself that every day since I met you again, Kiara. That's why I've worked so hard to help you and the twins. Not just to redeem myself, but because I saw in you the same strength and determination that I saw 12 years ago. Only this time I was determined to do the right thing." Kiara looked at Jordan, really looked at him. She saw the weight he carried, the guilt that consumed him, but also the genuine concern and affection he had for her and the children. "Jordan," she said softly, "I can't say that I forgive you completely, not yet, but I understand, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for us over the last few months." Jordan looked up, a mixture of relief and hope in his eyes. "Thank you, Kiara. That means a lot to me." There was a moment of silence between them, more comfortable than any since Jordan's revelation. "So," Jordan finally said, "what do you want to do about Lily?" Kiara took a deep breath, looking once more at Noah and Hope. "I want to meet her," she said with determination. "But not right now. First, I need to finish my training, get a stable job, create a safe life for Noah and Hope, and then I want to be ready to add Lily to our family, in whatever way she wants." Jordan smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "That sounds like an incredible plan, Kiara, and I'll be here to help every step of the way if you'll let me." Kiara reached out, taking Jordan's hand. "I'd like that," she said softly. At that moment, as if sensing the change in the air, Noah and Hope began to stir in their cribs. Kiara went to them, picking them up and bringing them into her arms. "Hey, little ones," she murmured. "How about we meet someone special today?" She turned to Jordan, who was watching the scene with watery eyes. "Jordan, would you like to hold your godchildren?" The surprise and excitement on Jordan's face was palpable. "Godchildren," he whispered. Kiara nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "If you want. After all, you're family now." With trembling hands, Jordan picked up Noah and Hope, one in each arm. The babies looked at him curiously, Hope even reaching out to touch his face. "Hello, little ones," Jordan said, his voice tinged with emotion. "I'm Uncle Jordan, and I promise I'll always be here for you and your mommy." Kiara watched the scene, feeling a peace she hadn't felt for years. The road ahead would still be challenging. There was a lot to be done, a lot to overcome. The idea of eventually reconnecting with Lily was both exciting and frightening, but looking at Jordan holding Noah and Hope, Kiara knew she was no longer alone. She had a family now, not just her children, but also this imperfect man who had become such an important part of their lives. The waters that had been so turbulent for so long finally seemed to be calming down, and Kiara was ready to sail whatever came next, with her family by her side. As the sun set outside, casting a golden glow across the small room, Kiara joined Jordan and the children. Together, they formed a picture of hope, redemption, and unconditional love. The storm had passed, and although the future was uncertain, Kiara knew she was ready to face it. With Noah, Hope, and now Jordan by her side, and the promise of one day reconnecting with Lily, she finally felt that she had found her place in the world. The waters might not always be calm, but Kiara now had the strength, courage, and support to navigate any storm that came her way. And that, she realized, was the true meaning of family. If this story touched your heart, then don't forget to leave a like. Use the super thanks located just below the video to directly support the channel and help create more amazing content. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Now don't miss the next incredible story that's appearing on your screen. I greatly appreciate your support and hope to see you soon. Thank you for watching.